why a story is important. So I thought that the best way for me to explain to you or illustrate to you why a story is important is by telling my own. So this evening I'm going to take you through my life. Now this is my family, and like everybody in life that has a family, you have a reason for waking up in the morning. Well, this is mine. So this is my gang, and this is why I do it. This is the most important thing to me, as it is to absolutely everybody else with a family. So we're all the same, but this is my gang. But my life is very different today, how it was when I was born, because I was born in the northwest of England in a town called Blackburn, Lancashire. And as you can see, this is an old industrial town that's really sort of coming to the end of its wear. But this photograph was taken in 1963, and I was born in 1962, just down that street. And I was sharing a 2-up, 2-down house with 3 other children. So there were 4 children in a very small room at the front, and my mother and my erstwhile father was sharing the back room. And we lived in those kind of conditions until the early 70s, when fortunately we were recognised as being really amongst the poorer of the poor, and we were given excellent new accommodations, and life really perked up after that. My life really until I was 16 years of age, when I left secondary school with no qualifications. I worked for 1 year for a builder's merchant in Blackburn, and then decided, now there's more to life than this. I've got to go out and do something more with my life. So in 1980 I embarked on the backpacking years, as I call them. So I spent a couple of years in Israel on a kibbutz, and this was me with some of my young drunken friends. If anybody's ever heard of a kibbutz, it's a certain sort of economic community that's in Israel, and the economics these days have changed from how they were 30 odd years ago when I was there. But when I was there, it was the peak of the experience to be on a kibbutz. It was operating at its prime, so it was magnificent. And I spent 2 years on the environment, and it really shaped the way I started to view the world. And then I travelled around a bit more, and then I found myself in Western Australia, where, as it happens, I do have a home, but back then I was just a backpacker. And I spent quite a bit of time selling encyclopedias from door to door, and never sold any, but did spend a really important part of my life when I was working on a wheat and sheep farm, where I spent 4 months during seeding season putting the crop into the ground. And this meant that I had to spend 13, 14, 15 hours a day in a tractor going around a very large field with nobody to talk to. And the only local radio station that we've got serves 2,000 people, so there was absolutely nothing to listen to. And because I spent all these hours going around and around and around and around, I started to think about life. And I thought, well, here I am, I'm 21 years of age, and I've been travelling since I was 17. And I've had all these experiences, I've done all these things, and you know, life's kind of okay, but I can't travel forever. So, you know, what's the next step for me? And in sort of thinking that, I sort of looked back, and then I realised that I thought, hang on a minute. Since I was 17 to where I am now, really what I've been doing is I've been setting goals for myself, and I've been achieving them. And so when I understood that that's kind of like what I was really doing, it was really logical for me to think, well, okay, I can't travel forever. What does the next stage in my life look like? Well, what's the highest thing that I think I'm capable of achieving? And, you know, what does that involve? So I thought, well, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm either going to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I'm going to go to Oxford or Cambridge. Okay, so that's the next step in my life. So I had this awareness that I thought, well, that's what's coming next. I'm going to enjoy myself and finish the rest of my travels and find my way back to the United Kingdom, and I would join that system, and that would be, you know, the next stage of my life. But When I left Australia, I met some interesting people in Thailand who said, you should go to Japan because you can teach English in Japan and you can get paid quite a lot of money. And there's ways to get immigration status, so, go and do it. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I went there and actually it worked out brilliantly for me. So I was hired by Berlitz School of Languages and I spent 3.5 years working for Berlitz in Osaka and saved all the money that I needed for my education. So I was ready for the next stage of my life. Unfortunately, someone intervened because in the first 6 weeks of my time in Japan, I met my wife. But actually, she was not destined to be living in Japan because where I met her was a school that it's a residential school for English. And I was there because I was staying in these cheap subsidized accommodations, providing the native English-speaking environment for the school to operate in. And she was there for 6 weeks brushing up her English because she'd just been hired by Cathay Pacific. And so she was going to be a flight attendant and she was coming to Hong Kong. So as soon as I arrived in Japan, she moved to Hong Kong. So for 3.5 years, we had a relationship by remote. So once I'd finished my time in Japan and I'd funded my education, we got married and I moved to Hong Kong. So I moved to Hong Kong in 1987. My wife was a flight attendant. She was away half of the time. And what I decided to do, that was my logical step, was to pursue A-level examinations. I hadn't done anything at school for so long, and even when I was at school, I wasn't particularly interested in it. But I thought this is the first step. So this was pre-internet, so I signed up for these correspondence courses, and I did 2 A-levels by remote. And while I was doing all of this, I had a job with the Sheraton Hotel and Towers teaching English. And that was the last job that I've ever had. And I still remember the nature of the boss that I had and what he represented. And I always thought, once I'm in control of my own destiny, my business will be completely the opposite of the way that he is. So I did my A-levels by correspondence and was made an offer to do law at Wolfson College, Oxford, on the basis I got 2 A's. I flew to England to take the exams, and a few weeks later came back and I got 2 E's. So my opportunity to go to Oxford was out of the door. So after sitting down for a couple of days and being miserable with myself, I thought, well, I've got to do something about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write to every law school in England and say, look, this isn't me. So I did that, and out of all the letters that I received, I was surprised to be invited to undertake the special entrance examination for the London School of Economics. So I did that, and eventually, or essentially, it seems I passed it. So in 1989, I went to the London School of Economics to do a Bachelor of Laws, and I came out with a 2-1 and learned that the most important thing in life is how to think. At law school, they teach you 2 things. They teach you how to find things and they teach you how to think. And whilst I've now forgotten all the law that essentially I was taught there, what I have retained is this particular way of thinking, and I think law gives you the opportunity to mould your mind in that respect. So I got a very good degree from the London School of Economics, and then I spent another year in London attending the College of Law to complete the solicitor's final examination, which I took and successfully passed. And all of these years I had a champagne lifestyle, because I would spend 10 weeks in England and 4 weeks in Hong Kong, 10 weeks in England, 4 weeks in Hong Kong. And my wife was a flight attendant, so she was flying all around the world and staying in 5-star hotels with exceptionally generous allowances. So most of the weekends were when I was in law school, I would be in Italy, or I'd be in France, or I'd be in Germany, staying in these very, very nice hotels with my wife, all expenses paid. So it was a rather charmed life. And I commuted backwards and forwards in the first class cabin of the Cathay Pacific jumbo jet because the tickets were exceptionally cheap, and she was of sufficient rank and privilege to be afforded the opportunity to buy first class tickets for staff members. So it was an exceptional way of life. So I graduated from the College of Law, passed the solicitor's final examination. Now, I was supposed to go to the UK 1 year later to start my legal career with a law firm called Eversheds. And I thought, well, I'll hedge my bets here. I'll see if I can get something going that's lucrative in Hong Kong, and then see what that means for me and what I'm going to do in the UK subsequently. So lo and behold, I started a legal consulting business by accident, effectively, that has stuck with me all of this time. And when I first started, I didn't have a clue about business. In due course, I came to understand that I had an absolutely rubbish business model, because effectively what I was doing, selling legal consulting services, which meant company incorporations and trademarks and employment contracts and all that kind of boring stuff that needs to get written down in businesses. Really all I was doing was selling myself as a poor man's alternative to a solicitor, selling my time at a discounted price. It just seemed to me that was a terrible business model, so I didn't want to have any of that. And then I read a book that changed my way of thinking, and it's this book called Focus by Al Rees. And their simple proposition was that in any marketplace, what you need to do is specialize in something. Focus on one thing and then do it well. So here I was doing companies and trademarks and all this kind of stuff, and doing some immigration as well, thinking, yeah, what do I do? Where's the best place to focus? And it just became apparent to me that it's got to be immigration, because nobody else was doing it. So that changed the way I thought about business. So a couple of years later, I wrote the first version of the Hong Kong Visa Handbook and put it on the internet for free, and it kind of made me. And I had quite a bit of money that I made out of that time, and I put it into other businesses. I thought it was bulletproof. I invested in a company called Microsulis, which had a very high technology microwave product for the treatment of certain physiological conditions. And I had a deal with my ex-partners with my immigration practice. I was running both of these deals at the same time, thinking that I was absolutely Superman. And then the Microsulis deal fell over with 9/11. And then after having made some rather strange mistakes in interpreting the nature of the relationship that I had with my partners in the big immigration deal, I effectively handed over the keys to my practice that I built up over more than a dozen years in 2006 to those people, without really receiving any compensation for it. But that was as a result of stupid mistakes made in my career. While I was in the process of making all of those mistakes on the immigration side and the business model development side, before I did the big immigration deal, my now business partner, Martin, and I, we were looking for an opportunity to brand a particular immigration service in Hong Kong, because we recognized that there are 17,000 people each year that have to trek down to the immigration department to get their visas extended. And it's purely, for the most part, a matter of administration. And so because we understood that, I believe that we could build a complete product proposition where we could sell the solution to that problem for people for less than 1,000 Hong Kong dollars, everything included. And this was in 1998, 1999 we were doing this. So we called it Visa Time. And because of the big immigration deal that I did, we never had an opportunity to really take that to market. But what we did was we built our very first purple cow. We just didn't realise that, you know, you would call something like that a purple cow back then. But we never had an opportunity to test it in the market. And that was called Geeza time. So during all of this time, I made the decision that I would have to bring my family out of Hong Kong and move them somewhere where they could grow up with grass under their feet. So we were living out in Sai Kung at the time, and we were living in 2 floors of a 3-story building, and it was very nice, and we had a couple of helpers. But we really felt that Australia would be a better place for our kids to grow up. So while I'm doing all this business, my children are born, Sayana and Mayana, my eldest Sayana in 1994, my youngest Mayana in 1996. And so we then decamped and we moved to Australia, and I was going to commute. And so this was the home and the standard of life that I had when I was at home in Australia, and I had a small apartment that we owned in Wan Chai, and I commuted between both places. So I had an absolutely beautiful, charmed life in Australia in all of those years. And it gave me the wonderful result of having Australian children that have had the benefit of everything that Hong Kong's had to offer, but also having a beautiful quality of life as you can have there as a child. And I suppose doing that, of course, like I'm like everybody else, you always want your children to have the things that you never had. And I suppose that's what I was doing there. But we moved to Australia. And then it all went to hell in a handbasket. It was unbelievable. Just as I'd moved, basically unpacked and felt, now I've arrived, it all started to unravel. Now, I won't go into the details of what happened. At the end of the day, these were mistakes that I made, and I take full responsibility for them. But I learned things. So I thought I'd share with you the lessons that I learned in the losing it all years. In the big immigration deal, what I learned was you should never undervalue yourself. If you know what you're worth, you should just demand what you're worth. I also learned that you should never allow yourself to be rolled over. When my dispute started with my ex-partners, even though they were far better resourced than me, I'm a lawyer. They always say that, you know, a lawyer who has himself for a client is a fool. But you know what? At least I know enough not to be rolled over. And so I litigated, and litigated for 2.5 years. Then one of my ex-partners got cancer, and I thought, enough's enough. Let's move past this. I haven't been rolled over. Let's drop hands and focus on the future. But that's what I learned. You don't be rolled over. I also learned you choose your partners very, very carefully. So then in the microsurgery era of my life, I learned that loyalty is honourable, but blind loyalty is stupid. Because I met a man who became my mentor, and I didn't have the experience at that time to understand. You know, he had flaws like everybody else. What I had taken to be a sign of strength, ultimately, in hindsight, I realised was actually a sign of his weakness. I also learned that when you're putting in your business together, you never, ever, ever, ever bring your money, ask your friends or your family to invest in your business. In Australia, I needed an immigration vehicle that I thought was going to be tax effective. So I made a decision that I was going to adopt a particular immigration strategy that was tax driven and not immigration driven, which meant that I ended up putting $1.5 million of my and other people's money into a software business that was revolutionary in what it was all about, but it never made any money. So in the Orla business, I learned actually you can't force a change in anybody's behaviour. It doesn't matter what your product is, it doesn't matter what your service is. If somebody's going to behave like that, there's a particular reason. You can't change people's behaviour. You've got to mould yourself to the realities of the relationship. And I also learned finally at the end of it all that you have to stick to your knitting. When I was almost done, I thought, what have I got left that I can rely on, that I'm better than anybody else? Right, Hong Kong immigration. So at that point, you know, it was just a question of, how do I get from here to there? But you stick to your knitting, because if you stick to your knitting, you end up doing something better than anybody else. So that's what I learned there. 2009, 2010, I'm out of options. So I said to Martin, who's living in Hong Kong, and I'm in Australia, I said to Martin, Martin, we're going back into the immigration business. He said, oh yeah, well, what's this all about? How do we do this then? I said, well, you know, Martin, all we need to do is rewrite the Hong Kong Visa Handbook. I can do that, it's not a big deal for me. But the Hong Kong Visa Handbook that I originally wrote in 1996, it just remained sort of a text thing. Because that was all that bandwidth and processing power and all the rest of that good stuff was available to you. So it was very, you know, wasn't particularly feature rich. So I said to Martin, I said, you know, everything that we need now to deliver feature rich content's available, and it's dirt cheap really. You know, it's $5 a month for this, or $10 a month for that. I said, you know, let's assemble a business like we did around, you know, the Hong Kong Visa Handbook in 1996. We just do it better this time, and we use all the capabilities of the modern internet. I said, you know, I'm in Australia, I can't be in Hong Kong delivering the consultations, but I can do all the work remotely. I can organise the on-the-ground arrangements for running things around in Hong Kong, so why not? Okay, how are we going to do it? So we came up with this idea of having two websites, one called the Hong Kong Visa Handbook and the other called the Hong Kong Visa Centre. And the Hong Kong Visa Handbook is a completely ad-free, no pressure to buy experience that just gives you all the content that you need to solve your problem, like the Wikipedia of Hong Kong immigration. And then recognising that people who look at your content and they've been taught how to solve their problem can make an informed decision about whether they need any help, and if they need some help, what level of help do they need, and how can you deliver that help to them in a way that's acceptable at the right price, so it just makes sense to actually, you know, seek that help in the first place. What does that business model look like? How can we use existing available technology to do that? Well, it was all there. Fax to email, Skype, payments by PayPal, it's all there, dirt cheap. So we put that together, and it took us 6 weeks to get our first set of paid instructions, and then we effectively haven't stopped selling ever since. And in the early days we bought traffic, and I'm not quite sure how effective that was, but it got people to contact us, so people were certainly visiting the site. And we were trying our hardest playing the unnatural SEO game with all of these ridiculous exercises in manifesting various spam websites and spam parlaying of information through certain sort of feeds and streams, and just basically sending rubbish out on the internet supposedly to improve your SEO. So once we'd figured that was all nonsense, we decided that we had a missing piece, because if we were going to publish regularly, then I needed another website, because I needed a daily content update site. And by having that in place, then I had an opportunity to reach out to the people who had these problems, and then they would be enabled to have their problems solved, or they could seek a specific answer from me. And by availing of them of a service where you get a reply, a podcast reply to the question that you ask within 48 hours. We're able to keep our core Hong Kong Visa Handbook content up to date with the ongoing realities of how immigration is being experienced day to day by people who've got problems in it that are seeking our answers from it. So you can add that to the content mix. So it makes your content live and interesting. So we needed then to have our third website, so that was going to be called the Hong Kong Visa Geeza website because it was the idea virus. And using all of the stuff that I've discussed in other sections of the talk thus far, we incrementally built up a foundation of content, of products and services that are all reflected in here in a purple cow fashion. And these are the 3 brands that we have manifested on the internet. And as I mentioned, this is the kind of performance that we've had since we started to do that, recognizing that we've got a tribe that is at least 50,000 strong. So during these years, what has happened is that the money came back and the problems that I had were all started to get solved. And as we grew more and more in demand as a business, it meant we had more readily available funds for investing. So we then invested in the video cha-cha business, which is the content production business. And in order to sort of maintain the fusion of the content production business and the immigration business, I realized that I needed to have another kind of irresistible offer, a kind of a really generous proposition that I could give to people, where essentially I could promulgate my own Visa Geeza idea virus, but do it in a way that is so ultimately so altruistic and genuine and generous that it really doesn't matter the fact that you've used it to promulgate, your own interests in that fashion. So I've come up with this program called the Visa Geeza Interviews, and we're interviewing 250 entrepreneurs over the next 5 years, and we're going to create a record of modern social history as to what the entrepreneurial community is actually up to in this town during this really interesting time. You see, my proposition is that everything that I've achieved so far, it's available to be achieved in every other niche by anybody at any point in time. And for me, it's just a question of when are people going to realize that all you have to do is this stuff and it's there for you. This is a surefire win. And it's interesting for me because it's obvious to me what you need to do, but people haven't cottoned onto it yet. And watching people's response to how we've achieved this makes it worthy of committing to record now, because I want to be able, at the end of these 250 interviews, to be able to look back at that and say, well, really, given now what's self-evident to everybody, how evident was it to the people that were in business in Hong Kong in that time? To them. So this has really forged now our opportunity to continually give back to our community, and in exchange, whenever there's an opportunity for service need, we anticipate that the vast majority of people we've got relationships with will instruct us. So that's where we are as of today. The next few years, well, the Visa Geeza interviews that I've just explained, that's a really important part of what I'm going to be doing in the next 60 months or so. In our own immigration services space, we're going to continue to disrupt the model that currently exists, the service model that currently exists, which is based on stuff that I was doing 20 years ago. This act of disruption is going to upset some of my old colleagues, because until now the way that we've creatively disrupted the existing immigration services market that we've defined for ourselves is the individual immigration services market. If you look at our content, you'll see that it's principally directed at people who are making decisions for themselves about immigration for the decisions that they control for themselves, or they're at least in a large part of control for themselves. But that's only 15% of the market by value. 85% of the market by value is the corporate market. So our next trick is to disrupt the corporate market, and I'd hope in the next 6 to 9 months there'll be something visible on the internet so you can see what we're doing in that respect. But if you look how we've disrupted the individual immigration services market, you can understand that what's coming next will be interesting and certainly disruptive and absolutely a purple cow by definition. And increasingly, as we produce more and more content, we're going to work on developing VGTV, a YouTube channel and a website, which will basically just be a complete content pool of all the content that we develop, things like this and other things that we're interested in and we talk about on a regular basis. Indeed, other people will talk about on a regular basis. People have got great stories and they've got great knowledge to share. And I think, you know, if you think about the number of seminars that you go to that you've really enjoyed but they don't get recorded, you're not parlaying it. You need to do things like this. I'm only going to tell my story once. Because I've got it all recorded, I'm going to develop a stream of content out of it and I'm going to make it available to everybody in a wider audience. So I only need to do it once. And historically it's been so expensive in Hong Kong to get, you know, high quality video done. So I thought, well, using Video Cha-Cha, we'll make that available to people because it's going to become evident that the only way that you can achieve remarkable outcomes is by using video. There's no other way. So anyway, VGTV is an important part of our future years. So, you know, I've bared my soul with you this evening, but I've also done this online. So anybody that comes onto our website has an opportunity to learn about me. If you're transparent, then it becomes apparent that, you know, you're vulnerable, you're authentic, and you're trustworthy. And if you can readily identify those qualities in a person, the chances of you having a relationship with them are significantly improved than if you're not able to determine whether you're authentic, trustworthy, and vulnerable. And it's a simple matter of telling your story, warts and all. But why are stories important? Well, we live our lives as human beings in a series of narratives, sequential narratives. We get up in the morning, we put on our dressing gown, we go to the bathroom, we brush our teeth. And this is how we live our life, this is how we think subconsciously. And when you're telling a story, what you're really doing is you're articulating a sequence of events in a narrative. And so storytelling works because we're biologically wired or evolutionarily wired to receive stories. And this is why you need to tell it. So you know my story, what's yours? Do you know your story? Why aren't you telling it? I'd love to listen to your story. Okay, so I hope this evening I've explained to you by way of example why you should have your story and why you should tell everybody your story.